He's whack.
Okay, we are live, everybody.
So Mike, if you could give me the signal when we're all ready to go and we've got enough folks here.
Yeah, absolutely. Should be just a minute. Carol, how are we looking on the attendance list?
George Harvey here now.
Yeah, we have quorum.
Great. So Chair, why don't we start in just a minute? Just going to rename the folks that have just joined so everyone can see who they are. And then we have our public delegate lined up in the waiting room, ready to go when we're ready for that.
Mike, is that the phone number ending in 2997?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
And Lloyd, I see you're on the call. Could you, we're asking staff who are observing to hang up and watch on the Mayor's Council YouTube channel. There's a live stream there, just so we can keep the screen fairly clean and you can rejoin
Yep.
at one point in camera.
No problem.
Thanks. We're just, Mayor Cote, there's a couple more mayors coming on, Mayor McCallum. I think once he's joined up, I think we should be ready to go.
Okay, sounds good.
Oh, we have sort of got Brad West just joining. Why don't we wait till he's and we have yet another mayor joining, Mayor Hurley. be on in a second. Then I think Mayor Cote declared to start.
Well, I'll give it 1 minute and then I'll start.
You should have asked people to come on around 8:45 instead.
I think we did.
Yeah, I know.
Cameron's here.
Okay, so I think I am going to get started with the meeting. Good morning, everyone, and I hope everyone has been taking care. I'm going to call to order our Mayor's Council meeting. I just want to start to confirm that the live stream is working, Mike.
It is.
Okay, that's good. And Carol, can you confirm you're able to take attendance through Zoom?
I can, Mayor Cote.
Okay. And as with our past electronic meetings, we will be doing our votes by verbal. So to take your mutes off when we do call the questions. If a vote does appear to be close, that's when we might do a roll call. So we are going to start with an adoption of the agenda, which also includes the revised edition that we received last night from the management presentation.
So moved.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. And we're going to move on to the adoption of our minutes from the May 28th meeting. I'll open it up to if someone from the Mayor's Council would like to move those minutes.
Moved. Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded, and I don't see any questions or comments, so I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Okay, moving on to section number 2, public delegates. We do have one public delegate to speak to the Mayor's Council this morning, Joe Kunstler. And can I ask if the public delegate is ready? And
We're just joining him now. Joe, can you hear us? Joe, we just joined you to the Mayor's Council meeting on Zoom. Can you hear us, Joe?
Yes, I can hear you just fine. Thank you.
Great.
well, welcome, Joe. And yeah, you're now on. So we'll pass the floor on to you. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me this wonderful morning. It is a great privilege and honor to address the world famous Mayor's Council, especially in front of His Awesomeness Brad West and His Excellency the Mayor, the Chairman, the Mayor of New Westminster, Jonathan Cote, and also Mayor Lameness, Mayor Kennedy Stewart. But more importantly, I'm here to address several important issues this morning. The first issue to me, which is of vital importance, is supporting the transit police. They do a great job. They need to be fully supported and funded, and the motion by the City of Vancouver needs to be rejected. Moving forward quickly to real issues, I fully support requiring by 2025 that all ride-hailing vehicles be battery zero emission, either battery or fuel cell. I understand the provincial government is working in overdrive to provide a zero emission alternative to vehicles fueled by petrol, which emits horrible carbon emissions and undoes the awesome work of TransLink employees and such. I really would encourage you to go for a 2025 target of zero emissions because our planet is suffering and we need real leadership on this issue now. Moving forward, we also need to stand behind the genius that is Sarah Ross and make very, very clear that first, we want her at every single Mayor's Council, and second, more importantly, we need to also, and I can't stress this enough, we need a network of bus lanes in Metro Vancouver, bus lanes that everybody from the Bolt bus can use to TransLink buses, so people transit will always be the first choice of people, because transit should be time competitive and reliable. As I explained in my written without, Sarah Ross bus lane, things will get very, very difficult in transit as, if it has to compete against congestion. We have bus bunching where buses all of a sudden, stick together, arrive two at the same time instead of on a regular, frequent basis. My time is running short according to my personal timer. So with that, I want to thank the Mayor's Council for having me. I hope you read my written remarks. I put a lot of work into them. I have a very high opinion of all TransLink staff, and I hope you guys will promote yourselves and your cunning solutions on COVID-19, which is one reason why I'm tuning in today. Go TransLink, and good luck to all the presenters, but especially Sarah Ross. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Joey, for joining us today. I think some of the items that you raised are on our agenda for discussion today, and really appreciate both the feedback here and the written submission that you did make to the Mayor's Council. I know you're a strong transit advocate and supporter out in the community, and good to hear from you. I don't think the Mayor's Council has ever been called world famous before, so I think we can add that as a first to our list there. But thank you for joining us this morning. Okay, so that completes our public delegates today. So we are now going to move on to item number 3 of the agenda, which is the report from TransLink Management. And I'm now going to pass it on to Kevin Desmond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of the Mayor's Council. Good morning. Mike, if you want to take it to my first slide, please. I just want to give a bit of a brief update on our Safe Operating Action Plan that we call SOAP internally at TransLink, as we're talking about it and working on it and evolving it each and every day. Last Monday, June 15th, we launched our Wearing is Caring campaign to encourage our customers who are able to wear a face covering mask when traveling in transit. It is a key element to our Safe Operating Action Plan that complements the many other program features. Wearing a mask on transit when you cannot socially distant is consistent with British Columbia's general approach, Dr. Henry's general approach to mask and face covering when you are in a position when you cannot socially distant. That may be going to the doctor, it may be going to the grocery store, in any other social interaction, and that's true for public transit as well. As part of the Wearing is Caring campaign, our customers will be seeing system-wide posters and decals installed to promote the use of face coverings and non-surgical masks. You can see that pictured. Please go back to the previous slide, Mike. You can see that pictured in the slide. We've been handing out face masks, branded TransLink face masks. You can see that as well pictured in the slide. Some 15,000 of those face masks are in the process of being distributed by street teams positioned in various locations across the system. They're easy to spot because they are accompanied by our mask wearing bus. You can find out on the TransLink News Twitter account the location and times each of the giveaway days. In fact, they have been very popular. We're soon going to be running out of those masks, and we've decided to order another 50,000 of masks for free distribution. That will be in the coming weeks. This is important. We mean it, and we want to try to get masks in everybody's hands. Next slide, please, Mike. And we are asking everybody to do their part. We're starting to see more customers do that, although at this point only about 1/3 of our customer base by our numbers are routinely wearing masks in the system. You can see the long line of customers in the lower right of the slide lining up to receive the TransLink branded mask. And a really cool photo of that Air Canada plane with a mask on its nose. YVR last week after we started our campaign paid homage to what we were doing. We were delighted to see that and showing off some of their equipment. In fact, the air control tower with a mask on it. And we're working with others, with BC Ferries, with the BC Tourism Bureau as well, to try to have a combined, unified message about wearing face coverings when you are in public spaces. And we're enlisting celebrities and other folks to help get the message out. Maybe the world famous Mayor's Council can help us with that as well. And pictured here is Linda Steele of CKNW, and our Parliamentary Secretary Bowen Ma, and Farhan Mohammed, the former editor-in-chief of Daily Hive, just as an example of showing that wearing is caring. We're going to continue to evaluate the effectiveness of our campaign. Our objective is that most people on transit, if they can, should be wearing a mask while they're on the bus, while they're on C-Bus, while they're on SkyTrain, while they're on their handy dart, because it's going to be safer for everybody else. That's what this is about. This is really about looking after our fellow citizen, our fellow rider on our great transit system. You know, one of the reasons that British Columbia has done such a good job, better than many jurisdictions, in managing and combating the coronavirus pandemic, is because we all are doing our part as citizens, and we're asking our transit riders to continue to pay attention to that. We're going to protect each other if folks are wearing a mask when they can. So please try to get a mask. Please wear it when you're on transit. Next slide, please, Mike. So encouraging the mask use is a component of our overall safe operating action plan that we announced a few weeks ago as well. Just to remind that we are committed to keeping our system running and making it widely available to the people of Metro Vancouver as they go back to work, they go back to school, and moving around the region. And of course, yesterday, the announcement of the phase 3 of the BC Restart plan. Our safe operating action plan is to try to make transit as safe as possible. And we ask our customers, of course, to help out along with the measures that we are taking. Those measures were developed in consultation with the province of British Columbia and incorporates 4 components: enhanced cleaning and sanitizing measures, restoring our service levels, managing the physical space within our system, and making recommendations to our customers, wearing masks, practicing all the great personal hygiene tips that we've been talking about. Several days ago, as part of the Safe Operating Action Plan, we did announce the expanded availability of hand sanitizers throughout the system. We're going to be piloting on 110 rapid buses installation of hand sanitizer units. We're going to try and see how that works from an operations and maintenance perspective and customer response. We'll be installing standalone units at bus exchanges and throughout SkyTrain in July. We're looking at 13 SkyTrain locations, 3 bus exchanges, Phibbs, Haney, and Scottsdale, and both C-Bus terminals. The standalone units got a little bit, you can see that in the center upper quadrant of this slide. Those are the current units. Those are the quickest ones we could get in place. We're looking at different units that are a little bit more ruggedized, that would have a foot pedal version and motion activated, larger sanitizer reservoir, and securely mounted within the system to manage any potential vandalism. So we're looking forward to getting those units installed on our buses and in our physical environment, and testing customer response to that. Next slide, please, Mike. We're also reaching out for creative ideas to make transit even safer and cleaner as people return to the system. As part of our TransLink Tomorrow program, we announced last week at the TransLink Annual General Meeting launch of our new open call for innovation that will focus on innovative solutions to adapt our system in a post-pandemic world. Our previous open calls have yielded interesting partnerships. For example, our shared mobility pilot and the recently announced pigeon boxes at several SkyTrain statements. The new challenge statement for the open innovation call is: how can we improve health, safety, and public trust as we welcome customers back to the public transit system in the context of COVID-19? Some areas to consider include reducing physical touch points, enhancing sanitation and ventilation, ensuring equitable access for all ages and abilities, improving TransLink's ability to gauge and anticipate evolving travel preferences and patterns, and generally making transit as attractive and competitive a travel choice as possible. It's a call to action. We want to hear from innovators in our community. So please look into how to submit your ideas. You can see the website, translink.ca, open call to submit those applications And in the coming months, we'll review the applications and we'll announce how we're going to move forward with some of those great ideas. Next slide, please. Now, of course, all of us, our Safe Action Plan, innovating and reaching out to our customers and innovators in our community is because slowly but surely ridership is coming back. And in fact, as of last week, overall system ridership for the week was at about 33% of pre-COVID levels, surpassing 500,000 daily boardings for the first time since the crisis. And in fact, ridership has now doubled since the low of the crisis. At the lowest of the low, we were below 240,000 daily boardings. So the ridership is coming back. It's coming back gradually. I think the gradual return of ridership is the right thing as well, the right approach. We want to learn as we go, as our Safe Operating Action Plan continues to evolve. But restoring our ridership, restoring the trust and confidence of our customers is of primary importance over time to restore the fiscal health and the overall mobility of our region. Ridership's returning across the board, most prominently on the bus system and the Expo and Millennium lines, a little bit less on Canada Line and still lagging on C-Bus, West Coast Express, and Handy Dart is about a quarter of former ridership at this point in time. Predictions are tough. I try not to be in the prediction business, but our crack analysts are predicting by the end of July with the phase 3 reopening, we ought to be around 42 to 48% of pre-COVID ridership. We'll see. There's no game plan for this. There's no research that would demonstrate how fast ridership returns. I have seen data internationally on ridership from Europe, from Asia, from other places in other metropolitan regions in North America, and the return of ridership runs the gamut at this point. And some metropolitan regions, transit ridership has responded very, very robustly. In other locales, still very depressed. But our ridership trend is a good trend and is not overly dissimilar. Next slide, please. Now, this image is actually hot off the press. We actually added this to my deck this morning from our ridership folks. We are, as part of the Safe Operating Action Plan, we are monitoring ridership on a very, very routine basis. We want to make sure that we don't get too far ahead with crowding. This image, it's a classic image of the peak to base ridership in a transit system with the gray image showing the sharp peak during the morning and the evening, very typical of pre-COVID times. That's how our transit system works. That's how a typical transit system works, with the typical fall off of ridership in the midday and going into the evening. What you can see in this graphic demonstrated with the blue line is the most recent information. Now, this is just the bus system, but it is fairly similar on SkyTrain as well. What's notable in this graphic and what we are seeing is peak ridership is not coming back nearly as quickly, particularly in the morning. Interesting, whereas midday and off-peak ridership has actually come back a little bit faster. Now, I can't exactly say why, other than I think it's a good sign. We've been messaging to folks, try not to travel in the peak. That's when you may see more crowding in the system. If you can travel off-peak on transit, please do that. And I think what you've seen, this flattening of the normal ridership trend is I think at this point, a good signal. So it is showing that people are modifying their travel habits and behavior. So I think we'll keep this information coming. We are not seeing any systemic crowding on any of our services at this point in time. There may be the occasional train, there may be the occasional bus that's got more people on it than perhaps folks might be a little bit comfortable, but for the most part, we're seeing fairly light loads, not surprising, with only about 33% of former ridership. So last slide, please. I'll just close with our favorite image. Now, this is our mass bus that accompanies our street teams when they're going out distributing the TransLink branded mass. So, Mr. Chair, back to you, and I'm happy to take any questions from the committee.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Kevin, for the presentation. Really appreciate all of the work that the TransLink staff are putting in during this incredibly difficult time. I think this is probably the most significant crisis TransLink as an organization has faced, and we're not facing it alone. Transit agencies all around the world are facing these challenges here. I think your presentation really highlighted our focus needs to be about ensuring in a safe manner we're regaining the trust and regaining the ridership back into our system there, because that's going to be so fundamental as we start to put this back together. But we need to do it responsibly and in a phased approach in a way that is keeping public health front and center and the focus of attention. So I know these are trying times, and there's no playbook in anyone's desk that says, in the case of a global pandemic like this, what are the steps to do? But I think we TransLink staff are doing a tremendous job, and we're reaching out to other agencies that are facing the same challenges and trying to find the best solution. So really appreciate all of that work from all of the teams involved. I now open it up to members of the Mayor's Councils for any questions or comments regarding the management report. Mayor McLaughlin.
Thank you very much. And this one's for Kevin. Kevin, we do an electronic news sheet to my village every Friday. If you could have staff send me this last image with the bus, I'll make sure everybody gets that on their electronic screen on Fridays.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mayor. And then staff who are watching the meeting today will make sure that happens. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Director McClutchan.
Thank you. And this one's also for you, Kevin. Thank you for the presentation and all the work you and the team are doing around getting ridership back up. I've had some concerns in our community around the safety and people kind of, not being sure whether it is safe. And I know you're doing a lot around getting people to wear masks. But as you said, there's still only maybe a third of people that are. Are there sort of other efforts around sort of asking people on the bus specifically or at SkyTrain to wear a mask, not public shaming, but just sort of saying, look, please, can you do this? Or is it, are there other approaches you're taking?
Yeah, that's a great question, Director McCutcheon. It's tricky. Be perfectly honest with you, the issue of masks. And again, as I've been saying all along, we are in close touch, watching, listening, communicating with transit systems throughout the world about how they're dealing with masks. Some jurisdictions are making masks mandatory, but they're really not enforcing it. And that's really the challenge. At the moment, we're starting with this approach. It's a light touch. It's raising awareness. This conversation here in a public meeting is to raise awareness. Having this cool bus out in the community is raising awareness. It's working closely with public health, with Dr. Henry and her folks to help raise that awareness. It's partnering with YVR, partnering with BC Ferries and many, many others to get the word out, to raise awareness why it's important to do it. So I think that's the first step. Let's see how well that works. Let's see if we can do it through appealing to people's judgment, to appealing to this concept of we're all in this together. We hear that phrase all the time, and I like to feel confident that as I said in my opening remarks, that BC has been successful in managing COVID so far, and that's because we've all done the things we've been asked to do. We've all taken the good advice of our health officials. We're doing the smart things. Let's continue to do the smart things. So I think that's the first step. If it's not working and we have to take other actions, I think we'll evaluate that. But we have to do it in close consultation with public health. At the end of the day, they're the ones setting the tone for the community.
Thank you. Yeah, and as you say, I think it is consistent with Dr. Henry's approach, just that softer touch. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cameron.
I'm wondering, Mr. Desmond, looking at the graph of the ridership and the peaks being flattened in the morning and the evening, it seems to me that that's probably related to people commuting to and from work. So I'm wondering if we know whether that is a result of some businesses not opening yet for people to come into the office. I know federal government employees, for example, haven't been, most federal offices haven't been opened yet. Whether it's the result of people driving or taking other modes of travel other than transit to get to work, or whether we're looking at potentially permanent shifts in how people are working. So, I mean, it seems to me there's three explanations for it. People are driving or walking, people aren't going to work yet, or people are never going to go to work as they did in the numbers in the past. Do we have any idea of which of the three it is? Because it obviously has pretty significant implications for how the transit system will have to function in future.
I mean, those are all absolutely great questions, Council Cameron. And we at TransLink and transit systems throughout the world are grappling with those same questions in the near term, and of course, trying to project what the what the later term is going to be and how this begins to settle out. So I don't think we know the answers really to your questions at this point of exactly who's riding and for what purposes. We've not done that survey quite yet. We do know that for all the reasons you cited, that's why our ridership has been depressed since the beginning of the crisis and to that date. We've also seen with the BC restart, that's when our ridership began to pick up. Activity started to pick up. What we've seen, interestingly, weekend ridership has picked up somewhat faster. We're sort of speculating what may happen on July 1st as well, if it's nice weather, if people are out and about and want to get out and about. So I think that is research that is yet to be done as we see the ridership trend in the many weeks ahead. I'd ask Sarah Ross if Sarah, did you want to add anything to Councillor Cameron's question based on the analysis of your group?
No, I think you answered it well. I mean, this is the same questions that we're grappling with, trying to understand, looking what's happening. And, you know, we are seeing that ridership come back in the weekend. So certainly there's either different distributions of trips, people using, certainly we've seen less drop in the time, sort of early morning times where we know essential workers are using transit to get to work. And, you know, the biggest drops have been in those peaks as, you know, the so-called laptop set perhaps has more options for working at home and not traveling. Those are some of the things we're monitoring.
And I just add that is the type of research that over time, Councillor Cameron, as we start seeing more people come back, as different economic activities and businesses and schools reopen, we're going to be very eager to begin to research that a little bit more and begin to test attitudes of what will happen as we further settle into the next phase of this crisis and ultimately what happens after there is a vaccine or a treatment.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Morton.
Good morning. I just took the R3 yesterday. Just you can see the evidence in the background behind me here. My mask is quite comfortable. It's actually more comfortable than my wife's Batman mask that she made me, just for the record. So I just want to compliment the product. It also spoke with passengers on the R3 as well as the driver. So want to just note that they have trust and confidence in the provisions that are being made to them for safe travel. So I just want to acknowledge that, and also the compliment as well the ongoing data, which is going to be really key for us as a transit system to really flexible and nimble. I heard Cameron in our meeting at Mobility. That's really important to be able to provide immediate responses to where we can take advantage of ensuring that we really move the needle on getting people back into buses as opposed to into their cars. Thanks for the opportunity to comment, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Well, appreciate all of those comments. You know, I think it's really interesting in difficult times, and you know, I don't think any of us have that crystal ball about where this is going. But as the time progresses, we're starting to better understand the situation we're in, and the actions we need to slowly get ourselves back in a better position than we are. So I know we'll be continuing to get this data on a regular basis, and it seems every month, you know, the landscape shifts and things become a little bit more clear. So really appreciate your presentation, Kevin, and yeah, keep up the woodwork with all of your teams involved with this.
Thank you.
If I can get a motion just to receive this report for the Mayor's Council.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Moving on to section number 4.1, the COVID-19 relief and recovery funding strategy. I'm going to ask Chris Dacre if she wants to introduce this item.
Yep, thanks, Mayor. I think there's a slide deck on here as well, Mike. We've, I'll just wait a minute for it to come up. We've been looking at our a number of scenarios. Just a sec here. Do you have the presentation, Mike? We've I can talk to it. It's kind of awkward without the presentation, though.
Do we know what's happening with the presentation? I don't know if we can get.
Sorry, folks, my audio is cut out. I'll ask Gemma to share the screen so you can take us through this deck.
Thanks.
I like the mask, Mike Hurley.
Yeah, well, while we're waiting, we can Mayor Hurley can demonstrate the use of masks for our transit.
Okay, just looking at it now.
It's okay. I'm back here. Slight Zoom problem there. I'm just sharing the screen.
Hurley. Yeah, well, while we're waiting, we can Mayor Hurley can demonstrate the use of masks for our transit.
Wow, it's back to the future.
Yeah, I feel like I've lived that moment already.
Okay, can everyone see the presentation?
Okay,
now?
just
Yep.
looking at it now.
It's okay. I'm back here.
You got it?
Slight Zoom problem there.
here
I'm
we
just
go.
sharing the screen.
Well, while we're waiting, we can Mayor Hurley can demonstrate the use of masks for our transit.
Someone's going to have
back
to
to the
mute
future.
their Zoom there.
I feel like I've lived that moment already.
Okay, can everyone?
So if we can maybe get the audio to stop.
You got it?
Slight Zoom problem there. I'm just sharing the screen.
So Mike, do we know where that's coming from? This is getting it very confusing, reliving the meeting over and over again. I feel like I've lived that moment already.
Okay, can everyone?
This is like some kind of mayor's council fever dream.
The audio to stop.
You got it?
Slight Zoom problem there. I'm just sharing the screen.
Mike, do we know where that's coming from? This is getting it very confusing, meeting over and over again. I'm afraid to say anything, but are we back to normal?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for taking control of the meeting.
Mr.
Okay.
Chair, assign one of us to learn juggling between now and the next meeting so that during these times of uncomfortable silence, we can tune to one picture.
Yes. Okay. I think we now have things under control where we don't have to listen to ourselves 3 seconds in the past in a big giant loop. Chris, are you able to move ahead with the presentation?
Yes, thank you. Nick, oh, perfect. Okay, so back again, please. Please go back 2 slides. You're going the wrong way.
Sorry, guys, I'm having technical issues
Go
now.
back 2 slides. You're going the wrong way.
Okay.
Okay. Advance 1 slide.
This might not be able to see it on the TV as well. Sorry, guys, I'm having technical issues now.
I think the slides are in the agenda package, right?
Yes. Sorry,
Yeah,
Mr.
can we
Chair.
just proceed?
We had a Zoom glitch there. I'm back on. Gemma, why don't you unshare and we can.
Okay,
people
can you
refer to
guys
their
now
packages until we
see
figure this
the
out.
board revenue forecasting update?
Yeah, Gemma, can you please unshare the screen and people can refer to their packages until we sort this out.
Okay, so Chris, maybe if we can follow along in our packages there and have you just go ahead and if you can occasionally reference the page numbers there, just so we can make sure we can try and follow along as best we can.
Yes, I will do that. Okay, so on slide 2.
Nightmare. I could not.
So
Gemma, you're not muted.
okay, so I'm gonna
Please go ahead, Chris.
Thank you. So on this slide, it's slide 2. It's showing on my screen, so I don't know if you can see it or not, but TransLink has continued to look at a number of various scenarios estimating the duration of the phases. So I'll go through each of these in a bit more detail in a couple of slides, but basically we're measuring how long until the pandemic will last, as well as how long the rebuild period is. So we looked at 4 scenarios: a quick recovery, lasting impacts, which is really a slower rebuilding period, hibernation, which is a slower end to the pandemic, but a faster rebuilding period, and the paradigm shift, which is both a slow end and a slower recovery period. Next slide. So in mid-May, the provincial government released the BC Restart Plan, which contained 4 phases. So phase 1, as you're aware, was mid-March to mid-May. And we moved into phase 2 on May the 18th. This was when businesses started opening and enhancing their, with enhanced protocols. So phase 3 is where we've just moved into. This phase allows more businesses to move up, but still under certain protocols. And then phase 4 is conditional on at least one of either a vaccination, community immunity, or a broad successful treatments being available. Next slide. So when the provincial government released the phases of the BC Restart Plan, we mapped our 4 scenarios that we've been working with their phases. So the quick recovery phase is really showing moving into phase 4 about mid next year. And then our second scenario, the lasting impacts, has us staying in phase 3 right through to the end of next year. And scenario 3, the hibernation, it includes a second wave putting us back into phase 1 this fall, and then another wave in the fall of 2021. And then the final scenario 4, the paradigm shift, shows us moving in and out of phase 1 and 2 right through through 2021. Next slide. So the fair revenue model, the methodology that was used for the forecast, really used the defined scenarios. And we also introduced a high and a low travel demand under each of these scenarios. And based on the BC Restart Plan phases, we assessed the level of travel demand within each of these phases. We then adjusted for the impact of the vehicle capacity constraints with respect to the physical distancing guidelines. Next slide. So this is the result of all of the analysis that we've done so far, and it is fairly fluid. We are updating and looking at where we're coming in. These are the cumulative 2020 and 2021 revenue forecast losses under each of these 4 scenarios. So under the best case, our revenue losses are estimated at just over 500 million. And the worst case is 1.4 billion. Next slide. This is an illustration. I actually really like this slide. It's an illustration of the range of uncertainty that we have in the travel demand. And this one is modeling scenario 1. So it also illustrates the capacity levels that we're working with in order to meet the physical distancing guidelines. And our assumption is that it includes about 2/3 capacity for our buses and a half capacity on rail. And to date, we're tracking just below the high travel demand level assumption under scenario 1. So you can see at the bottom left, the dotted blue line, that's where we're tracking. And so we're going to continue to monitor where we are within these scenarios as we move through the next few months. And I believe that's all the slides. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take any. Over to you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. So I'll open it up to members of the Mayor's Council if they have any questions regarding the presentation. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions, so I'll ask. Director McClutcheon.
Thank you. This is sort of a question that's lingering from the last presentation, but into this one as well. I'm wondering how nimble our system is. For example, the buses, we saw that, we're not seeing the 2 peaks that we're used to seeing at rush hour. Are we able to make adjustments sort of on a daily basis based on ridership? I would imagine that a lot of the costs remain the same because you can't just have somebody not come in to work that day. But I don't know, Chris or Kevin, if you have any comments on just how much we're able to sort of be shifting kind of on the fly based on ridership, or is it more static?
Well, that's a great question. And there are challenges, but there are ways that Coast Mountain Bus Company can build in some flexibility. We don't have enough time for me to explain the intricacies of how work assignments are prepared and eventually selected by our bus operators. But what we're looking to do in the fall is to shift a little bit the ratio of regular runs, what we call those are work assignments for a bus operator, with a more flexible approach from our relief operators, so that CMBC can be more flexible in putting out service and operators where the need is. The challenge is the availability of operators, not so much the buses, because for the off-peak period, we have plenty of buses because our bus numbers are based on the peak period. So there's a certain amount of flexibility that they are utilizing today. They are still moving around a little bit of service to where it is most needed, where CMBC field folks are seeing the tendency for a little bit more crowded, largely during peaks, notwithstanding that flattened peak period. But hopefully in the fall, with the fall service change, CMBC will have a bit more flexibility to, in real time, exactly as you suggest, Director McCutcheon, to better match capacity to demand. So there, we can do it. There's some flexibility. There will also be some limitations just on how the work is put together. And the limitations on our operator headcount.
Okay, appreciate that. I think this is probably a good opportunity just to also provide a quick short update publicly about the work that we're doing both with the provincial and the federal government. I think we've recognized that these slides indicate that TransLink has some significant financial challenges ahead, and we are not out of the woods yet. Although we're pleased that we're able to be a part of the provincial recovery and be able to stabilize service. So there's been a lot of discussions, particularly with the provincial government, and those conversations are going to continue over the next several months. really, I think things are going to start to come to a head, likely in September, October, where where we're going to have to be working on next year's budget for TransLink, and hopefully at that point we will be in a much better position to have clarity about the levels of support from both provincially and federally to help us work through these challenges there. So those conversations are ongoing and will continue throughout the summer. And really, I'd say the major decision points are going to be in that September, October time period there, as I know it's kind of one of those outstanding items that's still hanging out there, but there's still a tremendous amount of work happening between TransLink, BC Transit, and particularly the provincial government. So I'm not seeing any further speakers, so I will look for a motion just to receive this report.
So moved.
Good.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Okay, moving on to item 5.1, the COVID impacts on long-term planning. And I'm going to ask Sarah Ross to join us and just present this report.
Great, thank you so much, Mayor Cote. Joining me today is Eve Howe, who is our Manager of Policy Development. And I'm Sarah Ross, Director of System Planning. And for this item, I'm here on behalf of Jeff Cross and Andrew McCurran. As you know, for more than a year, we've been deeply engaged on Transport 2050, setting a course for the future of transportation in the region. And in fact, we were meant to be wrapping up our second phase of public engagement right now. And while we've postponed the public engagement, the technical and policy development work continues. And we certainly are thinking a lot about the future of the region. I'd say this crisis is sparking some great conversations about the cities, about the future of cities, about how cities must change to be more equitable, more sustainable, and more resilient. And also about the fundamentals of cities, how they are the keys for unlocking human potential and engines of opportunity. And about how the values we heard expressed so clearly in our first phase of Transport 2050 engagement, values of green space, mitigating climate change, and good, safe, affordable travel options will persist. We are working closely with Metro Vancouver. In fact, this delay to Transport 2050 provides us an opportunity to sync up even more closely with their regional growth strategy initiative. And we're also discussing with them the Declaration for Resilient Cities that was penned and signed by urban thought leaders from across the country and how to tailor those actions to our region. And I'm going to now pass it over to Eve to walk through just a few slides that speak to this report.
Sure. Thank you, Sarah. So this report, it really focuses on what the impact of the pandemic has had in terms of our long-range planning and our long-range view. Certainly the pandemic has increased public anxiety about proximity, and not just on transit, but in all sort of public spaces, whether it's at the grocery store, at the beach, or at a rally. And this has brought into question the future of cities. But I think it's important for us to remember that pandemics are temporary and that cities have proven to be resilient against shocks such as this in the past. And this is because cities are engines of opportunity and will remain so. And that for a city to function, it needs a reliable, safe, accessible public transit system. Next slide, please. So the goals and objectives of this region, which are articulated in the Transport 2050 plan, which is still under development, are looking at the long term. It's looking at where we want to be in 30 years. And what we would contend is that that vision doesn't change because they're tied to the core values that people have and hold dear to them. Those goalposts are looking 30 years out. We still want safety. We want a safe system. We want reliable transportation. We want it to be affordable and sustainable. And we don't see those as changing. Next slide, please. But what the impact of the pandemic has is that some of the things we're seeing today are supporting our goals, whereas others are hindering them. And there's this window of opportunity during this time period where there's an openness to discussion and change and accelerating certain things and mitigating other actions. So this table highlights, and the table in the report highlights some of the likely impacts we expect the COVID-19 pandemic to have in this region's transportation system over the next few years. And we're already seeing some of those. So for example, reduced transit ridership. We've highlighted some of the things that we might need to do to mitigate against that, such as the Safe Operating Action Plan, which Kevin talked about in the first presentation. We could be taking actions to provide incentives to bring people back onto our system, or information on overcrowding to allow people to make the decision of when to access our system where they feel more comfortable. We're already seeing some increase in driving. This is another impact of the pandemic is anticipated to have. And so we could be taking steps today to start mitigating against that, such as increasing bus priority access so that buses don't get stuck in that worsening congestion. One of the good things that we've seen over the past few months is a clear increase in walking and cycling. I think if anyone has tried to buy a bike over the past few months, they'll know that it's a very high demand product right now. And so there are things that we could be actively pursuing, and a number of municipalities are already looking at developing slow streets. So is there a role that we could be taking to support and encourage that? Telework is also another area where I think over the past few months, we've seen uptake to levels that we never really anticipated being able to reach in this region as a result of the pandemic. So we could be more working actively with employers in this region to ensure that where possible, teleworking remains part of our system. Over the course of the last few months, there's been a growth in e-commerce and home delivery. And that's an area where it was already a growing trend, and the pandemic really pushed that forward significantly. And I think there's an active role that we could be taking to get a better handle on this sector, which we currently know fairly little about, including active coordination of what the impact of it might be on our curbs and streets. There could be an interest in vehicle automation over the next while, something that's already an existing trend, which could be propelled forward as a result of the need for contactless delivery. So working with other levels of government, we should be working to ensure that the deployment of automated vehicles support regional objectives. The impact of the pandemic has had impacts on other mobility services in this region and throughout the world, whether it's car sharing or bike sharing. And I think this is a good time to consider the role that these services play in this region and consider whether or not strategic investments are required to ensure that they continue to play a role in this region. Softening demand for high density housing. That's something that is speculated could happen as a result of the pandemic. And I think it's important to ensure that high density living remains attractive and that people don't sort of conflate density with overcrowding. And then finally, we anticipate that coming out of the pandemic, there will be a period of unemployment where households will face a greater financial strain. And there's actions already taking place to mitigate against this, including the delay of our planned fare increase, which was supposed to go into effect on July, which has been delayed, and work underway to continue exploring support for low-income households with the province to ensure that they're able to continue to move around. And then finally, the very last item is we've seen over the past few months an increase in social solidarity and trust in government. And this is an area where we feel we should be building upon through ongoing communications and social marketing. And that's it for the slides. I will pass it back to you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the presentation. And I will open it up to members of the Mayor's Council if there's any questions or comments regarding the presentation or the report. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands come up, but appreciate the presentation. And I think COVID-19 has brought us a lot of challenges, but there might be some opportunities through these processes as well too. And I think these kind of reports are kind of getting our mind kind of focusing about how do both those challenges and opportunities work together. So really appreciate the work. If I can get a motion to receive this report.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Okay, moving on to item 5.2, opportunities for road reallocation of road space. And Sarah, once again, I'll ask you to introduce this item.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so I'd like to start by introducing Daniel Freeman, who is the Senior Manager of Bus Priority Programs. I'm going to walk through the presentation, and then Dan and I will together take any questions that you may have. The purpose of this item is to discuss two streams of work relating to reallocating road space as part of pandemic response efforts in the region. And both of these pieces have the shared goal of supporting a vibrant and resilient region, supporting the BC's restart and rebuilding the economy. So the first is supporting municipal efforts to provide more space to enable walking, cycling, public space, patio space. If you can just hang on the slides, I'll cue you. Sorry, they can. And then the second is efforts to improve reliability and travel time for buses. And more importantly, the people on those buses, so that people that rely on buses to get to work, to access essential services, can have the best possible experience, so that we can rebuild ridership and be as efficient as possible in our operations. And these two objectives are not necessarily in conflict. There can absolutely be win-win solutions that improve bus service and provide, for example, more parking space and retain parking, and we'll get into that in more detail. Next slide. So there are at least dozens of examples in the regions where municipalities are responding to changing needs, changing travel patterns, and public health guidance by creating more opportunities for walking, cycling, and public space. Some of this is on local roads, as shown on this picture. Some of it's on side streets around the corner from a major street, and some of it's directly on major roads. And I want to be clear that TransLink supports reallocating road space to support cycling, walking, and space for businesses. We share these objectives of active transportation, of supporting vibrant sidewalk life and thriving businesses. We want to see these objectives advance in ways that are neutral or positive, ideally for transit, because transit is also essential for our economic recovery. Next slide, please. So we are working with municipal staff to provide planning and design expertise, providing resources like the great design guidelines provided by some international organizations, and we're providing funding. We have $500,000 in unallocated funding for bus reliability projects this year, and we're making that available for municipalities to fund pilot projects. Next slide, please. One thing to be really clear about is TransLink is not a road authority. We can't make changes to roads without the approval of the local road authority. And typically that's the municipality. Sometimes it's the province. There is provincial legislation that requires municipalities to get approval from TransLink if they want to reduce the people moving capacity on a road that's designated as part of the major road network. So here's some examples of what would or would not trigger that. If a municipality is removing 24/7 parking to extend the sidewalk, say for queuing space or for a patio or for a bike lane, that doesn't reduce the people moving capacity. Actually, a bike lane would increase the people moving capacity. If a municipality wants to take a lane that is used for active travel, either some or part of the day, and then turn that into patio or queuing space, that would require TransLink's approval if it's on that major road network. And the purpose of this is that as the Regional Transportation Authority, we have a responsibility to ensure the overall functioning of the regional transportation network, including the transit system, and also importantly, goods movement in the region. Next slide, please. So transit is an incredibly efficient way to move people. And even with the significantly lower ridership we are experiencing these COVID times, it's still a dramatically more efficient way to move people than cars. And our region simply does not have enough physical space to accommodate everyone driving. The geometry doesn't work. And per the previous item, we want to make sure that the region stays on the trajectory of sustainable travel and doesn't see a shift to higher levels of car traffic and then higher levels of congestion. Next slide, please. So we see that there's a number of opportunities for improving the reliability of bus service and reducing the amount of time people on transit spend stuck in traffic. And while we know that traffic volumes aren't as bad as they were before COVID, they are quickly returning. And we are concerned that the congestion will soon be as bad as it was before in some places, and if not worse. And we know that given our financial situation and the pressures on our operating budgets, we're going to need to be as efficient as possible with our bus service. Now, this slide gives some examples of the types of transit priority measures that can be done fairly quickly and at fairly low cost. So lanes that are only for buses and for accessing local businesses are the most effective form of transit priority, and they can be implemented at very low cost, by changing some signs and perhaps with some paint. But bus lanes aren't the only way. Restricting turns can help. Putting in a bus bulb, which is where the curb extends so the bus doesn't have to pull in out of traffic, can be very effective. And this can also create more sidewalk space and create more parking space. So if the bus can stop in the lane to pick up passengers and not have to pull in, then you can have parking in the space where the bus used to need to pull in and out. We can also look at the number of bus stops. Every time a bus stops to pick up or drop off passengers, that obviously slows the bus down. And the ideal is to find the right balance between having stops that aren't too far apart, but aren't too close together either. And we have done assessment, and we do know that we have many corridors where bus stops are too close together. And certainly we have to consider the accessibility of the bus stops, particularly for seniors and people with disabilities. But we know that there are places where, for example, we have bus stops on both sides of the same intersection. And anybody who's ridden the bus knows how frustrating that can be when the bus is stopping and stopping and stopping. And so we're going to be undertaking a review of a few corridors to look for opportunities to remove or consolidate bus stops. Next slide, please. You'll recall that in fall of 2019, we released the bus speed and reliability report that identifies the top 20 corridors for bus passenger delay. These corridors are shown on this map. So bus passenger delay takes into consideration, how much bus service, how much delay, and how many passengers are impacted by that delay. Now, I want to acknowledge that over the past, say, 24 hours, we've heard from a number of local BIAs expressing concern about that transit priority will come at the expense of helping local businesses recover. I want to assure the Mayor's Council that we are very aware of the need to support local businesses. And it's true, we ask a lot of our streets. We want them to be vibrant places, to allow for patio space and walking space. We want to accommodate parking. We also want them to move vehicles and allow for goods movement and have transit. And, it's tough challenges, and we have to work collaboratively on how to find the right balance. And that always needs to be context sensitive to the particular location we're talking about. And we also need to take a corridor-based approach. And we have to look for opportunities across corridors. So if there are sections of roads that are in commercial high streets where the buses need to move slower, this can be balanced with other sections of the corridor where the buses have priority and can move faster. The motion for your consideration today is to ask us to report back to the Mayor's Council for a plan with possible quick win transit priority measures. And this will be a high-level assessment of the top 20 corridors that will suggest potential options and opportunities for reducing delay to buses, all of which are going to require much closer review and engagement. We're going to have a high-level assessment of potential costs and savings. And as I said earlier, TransLink is not the road authority. We can't make changes to the roads. What we can do is identify opportunities, provide some funding, work with the municipalities to assess the impacts, to engage with local communities and businesses, and to work collaboratively to find that right balance of all the things we ask of our streets. So Dan and I are happy to take questions.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the presentation. Opening up now to the council. Mayor Morton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We had an excellent, very robust discussion at the Mobility Committee. I have to say that given the report, it was like the Mobility Committee was purpose-built to have this discussion on how we really move the needle on getting people back into buses. And it was all about maximizing the number of people in a roadway and ensuring that they move properly. So I really appreciated the fact that cities are going to have input into individually solving problems, but in so doing in a much wider regional look, ensuring that we've got fluid movement of public transit service in the region. You know, to Ms. Ross's report, the geography in Metro Vancouver is difficult, challenging already. So for us, it looked like this was a very cost-effective, sensible use of TransLink money, given that we don't have a lot of certainty on the financial picture. But this has so many wins in it that we could see specifically to do with our growth is coming anyway. And we know that we're going to have an increased demand for ongoing forever. And it's about being responsible with our environment. It's also it speaks to 5.3 as well on GHGs as well, which we've never had such clean air as we do today. So we saw this as as Ms. Ross has noted, a window of opportunity, but I would support moving this much sooner than later, simply because I think this window is going to close rapidly. And doing this on a test basis, using these quite temporary measures to prove this out, I think is very, very effective. And we can see the results immediately, given that we have a tremendous amount of data now on movement of people in roadways and how we operate as a complete regional network. So we know that the unemployment numbers are not going down at this time, and that even at the lowest, at the highest point of COVID and before phase one, 110,000 people were riding the system, and those numbers are north of 13% unemployed. I don't see that improving too soon. And I think that this speaks to us having this opportunity, and this would be a very nimble approach. It would be quick. There wouldn't be any downsides that we could possibly see in trying this. So I would certainly speak to supporting this, and yeah, that's frankly it, as well as encouraging electrification as much as possible. So when we look at what's going in the roadway, how many occupants are there, what is the type of vehicle that they're using, and then give due consideration as well to, as per our terms of reference in mobility, is how do we also integrate effective goods moving through these roadways as well. And maybe that's through various hours of the day where we try and incentivize everything we possibly can do to encourage sensible use of our roadways. So thank you for the opportunity to speak to that, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Morton. Mayor Walker.
Thank you, Chair Cote. And Sarah, thanks very much for this presentation. I echo Mayor Morton's comments. I think this is a perfect time for us to be looking at, whatever these changes look like. My question is more around you intimated that the BIAs from a number of areas have commented on concerns that businesses have. Wondering if in particular areas such as White Rock, South Surrey, you might be able to identify the specifics of that. I would be very interested in knowing the businesses that are concerned and having an opportunity perhaps to work with yourself as well as those businesses to find out what kind of results they're looking for. I think if we're all in this together, it'll make it a much stronger program. Thank you.
Certainly we can do that. And when we get sort of an assessment of what some of the options are, we'll absolutely be working with municipal staff to engage local businesses, and then when we have recommendations, work with staff on engaging with the local councils on that. So you'll be aware of those things.
Thank you, Mayor Harvey.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and very supportive, and appreciate staff coming back to us at this time. I don't want to repeat Mayor Morton's comments. I'm fully supportive of everything that he said and think the same. I would just like to impress upon my fellow mayors to put some urgency to have this back to the mayor's councils for our review and direction to staff, especially on Highway 99. Of course, if we can do things to continue a high rate of use of that corridor for bus transportation versus the car, I think that's something that would be extremely important. I do not want to see the levels of vehicles on Highway 99 increase post-COVID. So again, I believe there's urgency to this and fully support putting this as a priority to come back to Mayor's Councils for review. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Director McCutcheon.
Thank you. I'm also fully in support of this and agree with the comments made previously. Sarah, just a question. The presentation focused on both the sort of cycling and walking roadways as well as these 20 corridors. I'm wondering, I don't want to dilute the motion or the report that you're looking to bring back to us, but I'm wondering why not look at also ways that are corridors that could be good for, switching over to be more focused on walking and cycling corridors at the same time that you're looking at bus pieces. Are those interlinked or are they separate because you're looking at sort of high-speed bus routes here?
In this report has been focusing on opportunities for transit and reducing delay to buses. We are working with municipalities on cycling and walking as well, but many of the municipalities are taking the lead on doing that. I mean, we of course also have a mandate for cycling and walking, and that is work that we do on a regular basis on opportunities for that. But our focus in this item has been on reducing delay to buses.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Buchanan.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Mr. Ross, for your presentation. I'm just curious in terms of just that point around how TransLink is going to leverage. I mean, you talked a little bit about the great work we're doing in some of it around our open streets, but how we're going to actually share the messages and use some of the data that both you're collecting around cycling and walking, as well as what we're collecting as municipalities. In addition, I know Lonsdale is one of these corridors, and it is a plan for us to create a great improve it to be a much greater high street. But we've had to expand, and I know there might, from my staff perspective, the delay at this point is fairly negligible. And we also need to be looking at, because we have expanded out what was parking to parklets, we need a bit of a buffer there and support our businesses with having some parking until we can actually evaluate how our road network works on parallel roads and looking at where we can put some of that parking demand. And so I'm curious to how much time as we move through these phases from the other presentations in terms of looking at giving us some flexibility to continue to kind of do what we need to do at the municipal level, but coordinate all that data collection and then reporting it back out. And also around the walking and cycling in terms of, there is a lot of research that shows that people who do walk and cycle to areas of economics, so our shops and services, actually spend more money over time. So really want to make sure that we're supporting one another in terms of the messaging that we're putting out to the community, so that we don't always get the argument that, well, if I don't have parking, therefore my business will fail, when in fact, there's evidence to show that it's quite the opposite if we actually improve walking and cycling and movement by public transit, that economically those businesses do far better.
Yes, absolutely. That's an excellent report that there is a lot of evidence that, people walking and getting on and off buses and waiting at bus stops are really important economic generators, supporting local businesses. And your point about data is really important. I'd say typically what we would do in these situations is we would we would do a design, and we would engage, and we would do modeling, and we would assess the impacts, and we would talk to everybody long before we actually make a change. And as is actually referenced, I think, in one of our earlier reports, you know, there's opportunity here as a willingness to try try things and then adjust. And so I think the Lonsdale example is a great one, because your team moved very quickly to be responsive to the interests of the local community and to the health guidance, and make changes. And so we absolutely need to monitor that and look at what the impact is, both on that cycling and walking activity, transit ridership, look at the impact on buses moving through that corridor, and then work with staff to make adjustments if we see that impacts are arising. That's a great example of one of those streets I talked about, where we're trying to have that street do a lot of heavy lifting, right? Be a commercial high street, support cycling. It's also part of that major road network. So that's a challenge on that. Dan, do you have anything to add on that, or?
No, I think I want to echo what Sarah says, that, you know, we are beginning to monitor performance of bus service across the region, because we want to understand impacts, you know, where there's changes, and also up and downstream. You know, corridors like Lonsdale, as you know, Mayor, is critical on the North Shore. It's one of the oldest transit corridors in the region, and it's really essential for folks all over the North Shore. And so as traffic patterns change, and you know, we see return to driving, and we see how people are adapting, we'll continue to provide that information to your staff, and look to identify, you know, are there ways or adjustments that are possible or needed to meet all of, you know, to best balance all those different needs. And our role here, this committee, is really to highlight particular some of the focus on bus performance and its impact on regional, you know, operating costs and TransLink budgets, and the opportunity cost that provides.
Yeah, I just would say, I mean, hopefully, you know, yes, and to Sarah's point, you know, this is, you know, we are doing things very quickly across the region and responding, and yeah, normally we would take a lot longer time to plan this out, and in some ways, this is sort of giving us the opportunity to look at how do we do things, move in directions that we want to be going, and evaluate. And as I've said to my community, you know, is the plan perfect? Probably not. Are we going to make mistakes? Probably. And then let's evaluate and fix it, and look to see how we can make it better. And certainly for Lonsdale, you know, it's a direction we've wanted to go. And I certainly, you know, transit moves 25,000 people along that corridor in a day. And so really what I would like to see is how do we make that improvement to make sure that the bus is moving as efficiently as it can, with accommodating some of the other objectives that we have, without seeing a significant return of car traffic to a 100-foot wide street, which we know can function far greater and move more people if we can actually have more people doing other modes of transportation, including the bus.
Thank you. So we're going to move along on the speaking list. Councillor Cameron.
I won't repeat what's been said, although I have heard from our Business Improvement Association also, and concerns about how to balance these various access for customers, and making it pedestrian friendly, and obviously speeding up buses. So I'm glad the staff are alive to these concerns, and I echo what my colleagues have said. I will just make a quick comment on sort of the context in which we're looking at these roadway, regional roadway sort of responses. You know, there really is no viable future for the region. I think we all know this, that doesn't involve a robust transit system. There isn't enough road space. If we didn't have a highly functioning transit system, there just simply isn't enough road space in the region to accommodate people driving where they need to get to every day. And so the viability of our region depends on us sustaining the transit system. You know, there were some of the questions or the points that were put up in the previous presentation about, the future of high density or higher density living. Well, the fact is, there's no affordable housing in the region if there isn't a measure of density. And it isn't a matter of choosing whether we want to have, we each want to all have single family homes. The fact is we don't have enough land to sustain that. And that would create obviously a huge urban sprawl and other issues. So we have communities built along transit routes that are dependent on transit. And I think it's incumbent upon all of our communities to ensure that those communities are well served by transit, because there really isn't, we can't go back to a region where we all try to drive places, and there's no going back to a region where we all live low density living. The city just simply doesn't function. So these sorts of initiatives that staff are proposing in this report have to be seen in that context, and that we all have a shared interest in making sure that the transit system isn't caught in congestion, that it functions well, it gets people where they need to get to. So I very much support these initiatives. There's concerns that I've heard from certain residents, but ultimately this is the only way. That I can see moving forward.
Thanks very much for the comments, Mayor Brody.
Mr. Chair, in the history of TransLink, I don't think there's been greater controversy over any issue more than this one. I go back to the early days of TransLink and the debates over the Granville Street corridor in Vancouver. Very recently, I go to the debates in West Vancouver over the priority measures that were proposed for Marine Drive. So my question is, while we want to be efficient about this implementation, exactly what is going to be the consultation with the local businesses, the BIAs, the other stakeholders who are very much interested in this particular issue? What's going to be the consultation process?
Thanks, Mayor Brody. Yes, this is always a challenging conversation. And the consultation process, we'll be working with each of the individual municipalities and working with them to design and determine what the appropriate consultation process is in that for the topic, for any change we're considering. And that will be different depending on what it is and what the impacts are. There's, as I've mentioned, there's several things that can be win-win-win that may not need very much consultation, and we can put them in and they can be temporary, just as municipalities are doing right now. And if there's things that we recognize as more difficult trade-offs, then we would work with municipal staff to do more engagement on that. And again, our focus here is on things that could be done on a temporary basis to try them out. And then of course, we will be reporting back to the Mayor's Council on this. And again, our plan is an assessment and some identifications of options and opportunities that we may want to pursue and talk to municipalities and the local road authorities. So for the case of Highway 99, which is one of the top 20 corridors, that would be the province. And there's some other sections as well.
Well, let's take an example, and I think Highway 99 is probably the best example of where this can really do a lot because they widened the highways a number of years ago, and I don't think that that's been taken out to its fullest extent. But West Vancouver, as I understand it, they had a real battle over what was going on Marine Drive. Are you just going to reopen that discussion or just implement it?
Well, we aren't going to just implement anything because we don't have that authority to do so, which is, and so there has been in West Van as an example of where we proposed things that were not acceptable to the local community, and they didn't advance. what we want to look at is do an assessment overall in the region of where we might be able to make gains reasonably quickly by making some changes to improve travel time for customers, be more efficient with our operating dollars. We want to look for places and work with the willing and where we can move to make some changes that are going to be really positive. And so that will be where we focus our energies.
What about the other side of the equation, through the chair? What about the other side of the equation where the businesses are saying we're struggling to find viability here, and your changes are going to interfere with what we're trying to do?
And so that's very much the conversation that we need to have. And as I tried to put some emphasis on, I think there are changes that I don't want anyone to think that it's an automatic conflict of transit priority versus local businesses. I think that bus bulge example I gave, I think that is in the interest of local businesses. It creates a great, more sidewalk space, more parking space, and can be a real win. Also, there's lots of parts of where our transit service run that aren't in local business areas where they still experience delay. And those gains, if we can experience delay in one part of the corridor, that benefits the overall trip and benefits the customers overall and the region overall.
Well, I guess my point is that if we go in believing that we have all the answers, I think we're making a mistake. We cannot say that we want quick wins and various priorities without an appropriate consultation with the locals who will know at least they will believe they know the local impacts on this.
Thank you, Mayor Brody. Mayor West.
Thanks very much. Thank you for the report. Very interesting, something that I'm strongly in support of. I want to make a couple points. First, to be interested in any additional information that TransLink staff can provide with respect to connections to these corridors to make sure that they become even more successful. So in Port Coquitlam, we've had the rapid bus, obviously, the R3, and one of the focuses of our city has been how do we, beyond obviously the residential footprint that exists along that corridor, how do we improve connections, whether that be pedestrian or cycling, so more people can connect to those rapid bus connections and make their way throughout the region. So any information that's available from TransLink staff or any work that they might suggest around improving connections to these corridors would be appreciated. I want to pick up a little bit on the comment from Mayor Brody, and I think it's an important one. I have a slightly different take on it. You'll see on the map that the further east you get out in this region, in some of the fastest growing parts of our region, the fewer lines you see. And I reflect upon, as Mayor Brody says, and I'll use the term debacle that was West Vancouver and the attempt to make some improvements there. And my position pretty simply is that we shouldn't be wasting our time or money if the municipality is going to piss backwards on the investment, because there's lots of municipalities in this region that would love the investment. I think it's the responsibility of the city council to when they make a decision to support these investments, to stand by those and to withstand whatever pressure they may come under. And so I'm not interested in wasting time or resources in getting into a fight and trying to do something positive for a community and then have it ultimately fall apart because of politics. There's enough municipalities in the region that I think would welcome this. I know my own certainly would. And so, I think Ms. Ross was a little bit more polite in terming it, we're going to work with the willing. And I think that that's really important. And I know my municipality, for one, is certainly willing. And I think that's where our focus should be. We shouldn't be trying to, jam this into a place that doesn't want it, because there's only so many dollars. And again, there's lots of places that would welcome this type of investment without issue. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Mayor Buchanan, do you have a second comment?
Yes, sorry, I do. And I just wanted to bring something up. Sorry. Yeah, I just want to follow up on that, both what Mayor West and Mayor Brody said, because I do think, definitely we need to be at least engaging with our community and getting some feedback in terms of how they perceive this to be impacting and getting their perspective. But I do think, and these were some of the comments that I made on a call that Director Cote and I were on with BC Transit and some of the other mayors, both from this council and across the province. But really, I think we are, looking post-COVID and looking at recovery, that I think that's the starting point of our discussions of an innovative and sustainable economic recovery is the commitment to the notion that transit is the vital service. And we absolutely need to be, yes, we must start with the willing, but at the end of the day, I think we all at this table need to be committed to that notion and be advocating for that and pushing the provincial government to be the partner we need at the table so that we can go to the federal government. And we need to, back in our agenda item 5.1, which was talking about our declaration for resilience in Canadian cities and working with Metro Vancouver, and what was the other group? Oh, our municipalities in Metro Vancouver. But I also think we need to be engaging the business community. So, just as I said earlier, we do need to be talking. We need the data. We need the research to show that we need a region that functions with public transportation and needs to be connected to economic hubs, not only within the region, but within the province. We need to be able to move goods and services. So we need the BC Business Council. We need the boards of trade. We need the group that's going to come together for the Regional Prosperity Initiative with Metro Vancouver. These are the folks who, want to see the province be prosperous. And if we are stuck at the local level and local politics of not being able to implement changes of road networks, whether it's bus, walking, cycling, and pull these things together, if this is now not the time, I don't know when it will be. Because if we just move forward slowly, be piece by piece, without engaging that broader conversation, we will revert to status quo. In fact, probably even worse, because people are fearful of the public health implications. So we have to be mindful of the public health implications and continue to realize we're still in a pandemic. But we have to be able to pull all these conversations and the key people to support and have our back to be able to make those bold decisions, because at the end of the day, this is what's going to make not just our region, but the entire province be more prosperous.
Thank you, Mayor Buchanan, for those comments. So I'll just conclude. First of all, I am very supportive of moving ahead with this recommendation. This isn't new work from TransLink. This is something that's come to this body before, and something we recognized as important to ensure that our bus network was working efficiently. But I think it's more timely than ever, as I think the challenges that we're facing with COVID-19, when we have even more barriers to try and gain support and get people to use transit, we also need to be getting back to some of the basic fundamentals, which is an efficient and effective bus and transit system. And when a bus is not moving very efficiently, when a bus is moving a lot slower than a car trip would be, it's even one more barrier and harder for us to make the types of mode shifts that I think we as a region understand that we do need to be making. So I think these are really important considerations. And I think we're in a good spot in that we don't have to work out to identify the top 20 corridors. We actually have already done that work last year, and we have some good starting points to start this discussion. I do take the comments about really focusing our efforts on where the partnerships are going to be the most fruitful and successful here, because as has been noted, these can be incredibly controversial projects in cities, and particularly when you've got a lot of uses competing for limited road space there. And I think there's going to be, at least in the short term, far more opportunities than we're necessarily going to be able to delve into there. And I think we want to focus on the ones where it looks like all of the partners are aligning and we can get the best bang for our buck, instead of getting stuck in year-long battles that don't end up with results there. And I think that no doubt starts with the individual councils, because if an individual city council and a city isn't on board, well, that's your starting point. But I think TransLink has to go a little bit beyond that too, and test the temperature of particular business districts there, because if we start getting the sense that no, this is not going to be a straightforward process, it's going to require more resources, where we're in contrast, we have other projects that might achieve the same results, but without that there, maybe those are the areas that we start to focus on first there, given that we only have a limited amount of resources to start there. So, but step one is getting that willing partner from the individual cities and see who wants to most engage in these discussions there. The only other question I had regarding this report, and I fully support us identifying the previous top 20 corridors, and here I think a more significant type projects that look at corridors are really important. But I think of other bus routes in our system that might have really small modifications that can make smaller differences, but when you add those all up together, and I think of one local bus route in my own community in New Westminster, where our staff constantly talk about a few small changes that could happen to the 106, which would shave off minutes off that route there. And I don't think a route like that deserves in the priority list that's been saying here. But I want to know, is TransLink open to engaging with municipalities on smaller changes on other bus routes that might have much smaller impacts, but when you look at them all collectively, might actually have some big impact as well?
Yes, we absolutely are. And the funding that I referenced through our bus speed and reliability program is not just for these top 20 corridors. And we've been working with staff at New West on a number of changes.
Okay, thank you. Well, and I think that would obviously apply to all cities there, regardless of where they're located. Okay, so I see an additional speaker, Mayor Vagermoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to sort of echo some of the comments I heard, particularly from Mayor West. I think having a focus on municipalities that are really excited about initiatives like these. We here in Port Moody have carried an investigation into slow streets at the council level. So please, for TransLink staff, please add us to the coalition of the enthusiastic. And we are looking forward to any kind of partnerships we can have, both for efficiency's sake and as well for driving business to our local businesses. Thanks.
Okay, thanks for those comments. So that's the end of the comments I see here. There is a recommendation on page 22 of the agenda that came from the committee. I'll look to.
Happy to move.
It's been moved. Is there a seconder?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It carries. Now moving on to item 5.3, GHG emission targets for ride hailing. We do have a short presentation from Eva, and I think given the time, if we can just keep the presentation relatively short here. But Eva, if you're able to introduce the item.
Sure, thank you. I will flow through this pretty quickly. So the focus of this is the challenge we have, maybe the next slide, please, is that when ride hailing launched at the beginning of this year, we saw rapid growth up until the COVID pandemic hit, which is not unlike other urban areas. So we have a challenge, not only in terms of congestion, but in terms of the impact on regional greenhouse gas emissions. This is due both to the rise in trips as well as something called deadheading, which is where the vehicles drive empty. So we anticipate this sector, post-pandemic to return and to potentially have an impact on our ability to achieve our regional greenhouse gas targets. Now, if you look at the provincial regulations on this sector, it currently lacks any consideration of greenhouse gas emissions. There's an age limit But that's all in terms of environmental requirements, which is inconsistent with the way the taxis are currently treated. They've faced eco-friendly taxi requirements since 2007. Next slide, please. And I'll skip over this next one. It basically says that the province is primarily responsible regulatory authority over this sector, and they establish vehicle and driver conditions. Next slide. So the policy basis for action is really focused on the fact that in the region we have adopted greenhouse gas targets of carbon neutral by 2050, and as well municipalities have their own greenhouse gas reduction targets, and many have declared climate emergencies. Next slide. So there's two, I'm going to talk a bit about options to address greenhouse gas emissions from this ride-hailing sector. And there's two bundles of options. The first one is incentives. And this is already what I would consider the status quo. This is already in play. This is the carrot, providing discounts for zero emission vehicles, such as what's in the current intermunicipal business license, which is a discount of the annual fee of $120 for vehicles that are licensed as zero emissions. And as well, it can also exist in street and traffic bylaws, such as in Vancouver, where there's a congestion and curbside management permit, which charges a pickup and drop-off fee for each trip that's completed within the core area during certain times of day. And that's discounted 50% for zero emission vehicles. So potentially other forms of incentives could include preferential access to certain areas. So these are sort of the incentives option. And then the next slide focuses on the stick. And this currently doesn't exist. And these are regulatory requirements. And there's a number of ways that they can be designed. You can require that that an industry or a company meet a fuel economy target. They could have to meet a proportion of their fleet being zero emissions, or you could set it more broadly where they have to meet a greenhouse gas reduction target and give them a variety of options for compliance. Next slide. So there's pros and cons with each of these approach, and I'll start with the incentives piece. So one of the main advantages of incentives is that it's within local control, as demonstrated by the fact that it's already been implemented locally, both in business licensing and in street and traffic bylaws. And because it's an incentive and it's voluntary, it tends to be supported by industry. And that's the primary, and that also leads to one of the main disadvantages of incentives is that there's uncertainty in terms of uptake. And as a result, your emissions reductions are not guaranteed. And then as well, the impact of the incentive is very closely tied to the size of the fee that was originally charged. And I'll quickly talk about an example about that later. Regulations, on the other hand, have the benefit where because they provide some certainty, they support your climate targets. And they also encourage industry to take responsibility for their emissions. There's a number of design options which can encourage creative solutions and responses. As well, pilots that have taken place over the past few years in cities such as Austin and Seattle and Atlanta have demonstrated that the technology is available today to be compatible with ride-hailing operations. And then finally, California has recently, in 2018, set a precedent by establishing the Clean Mile standard for ride hailing, which is a regulatory approach. In terms of some of the disadvantages, the key one is it's unclear whether or not municipalities can implement without infringing on provincial regulatory authority. And as well, one of the big challenges is that TNS operators, they do not directly own their fleet. So any good regulation needs to ensure that industry is consulted with and that there's sufficient lead time in order to comply. So just quickly, a couple of examples. Okay. So maybe we'll skip the examples and go straight to the recommendation. I will turn it. So at this point, we're essentially recommending that because what's missing is the regulatory approach in this region, and that to really address this challenge, we need to be holistic, and henceforth this recommendation. I will turn it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. I'll open it up to members of the Mayor's Council if there's any questions or comments regarding the report or the presentation. Seeing none, there is a recommendation on page 30, and I will look to the Mayor's Council if they'd like to move the recommendation.
So moved.
Their seconder?
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Seeing no further discussion, I will call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Okay, that brings us to the end of our public Mayor's Council meeting. Our next meeting is on July 30th. We are planning to keep the same format going there. I'm not sure how things are going to evolve into the fall, but at least until July 30th, we're going to be continuing in this format. So thanks everyone for joining us. Maybe if everyone can stay online, but feel free to turn your video off and mute and over the next 5 minutes as we transition into the closed meeting.
Thank you, Chair. We'll cut the live stream now, and we'll there are some